There are men so wealthy they can buy anything in the world, except for one thing: the belief that good people still exist. Arthur Pembroke was one of those men. 76 years old, owner of the tallest buildings in Boston, with ships bearing his name docking from Halifax to Charleston. And yet, that afternoon, he sat in the cavernous library of his estate, eyes shut, pretending to sleep, in order to set a trap. A stack of $5,000 left carelessly on the walnut table within reach of anyone who walked in. He had done this dozens of times, and not once had humanity disappointed his expectations. People always took it. Always. But this afternoon, the one who entered the room was not a greedy adult. It was a 7-year-old boy, wearing shoes torn at the toes, shivering with cold. And what the boy did next cracked the heart that had been frozen for 20 years inside Arthur Pembroke. A crack he would never be able to mend again. Stay with me until the end of this story, because the ending, his last will and testament, will leave even those who carried the Pembroke name utterly speechless. I've often thought that bitterness is not born in a single day. It accumulates, layer upon layer, like snow falling on an old roof, until the entire house buckles beneath its weight. Arthur Pembroke was not born cold. He was taught to be cold by the very people he loved most. Arthur Pembroke was not asleep. His eyes were shut tight, his breathing heavy and steady, his gaunt frame sinking deep into the burgundy velvet of his favorite armchair. To anyone watching, he was nothing but a frail, harmless old man drifting into a late afternoon nap. But behind those half-closed eyelids, Arthur was fully awake. His mind was sharp, calculating, and waiting. This was a game he still played, a habit he called the test of conscience. Outside, the season's first snow fell softly past the tall glass windows, laying a thin blanket over the withered rose garden of Pembroke House. Inside the library, the marble fireplace crackled, radiating a warmth so comforting it made one want to let down their guard. Oak bookshelves rose all the way to the ceiling. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. On the walls, the oil portraits of the Pembroke ancestors looked down with stern eyes. Arthur had staged a perfect scene. On the small mahogany table beside his hand, he had placed a thick envelope. It was already open. Inside was a stack of $100 bills totaling $5,000, enough to change an entire month for a poor person. A few bills were deliberately left sticking out, looking as though a doddering old man had accidentally forgotten them where anyone could see. Arthur waited. Then he heard the door handle turn. I think about Arthur in that moment, and I see something strangely sad. A man who sets a trap to catch the worst in others is, in truth, exposing the poverty within his own soul. He wasn't testing people's hearts. He was testing to prove himself right, that the world deserved the suspicion he had always given it. It is a very particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of one who always wins games that bring no joy in winning. The man who entered was a young man named Samuel Carter. Samuel was the newest member of the maintenance and cleaning staff at Pembroke House. He had been working there for only 3 weeks. 28 years old, but his face carried the exhaustion of a much older man. The dark circles under his eyes told the story of sleepless nights and unrelenting worry. Samuel was a single father. Arthur knew this from the background check. His wife, Lily Carter, had died 2 years earlier from complications during her second childbirth at St. Anne's Hospital. The baby hadn't survived either. Lily was gone, leaving Samuel with a mountain of medical debt and a 7-year-old son named Theo. That day was a Saturday. Normally, Samuel worked alone, but Maple Street Elementary had closed for emergency repairs after the snowstorm, and Samuel couldn't afford a babysitter. He had begged the housekeeper, Evelyn Marsh, to let him bring his son to work, promising the boy would be quiet as a little mouse. Mrs. Marsh reluctantly agreed, but warned him bluntly, if Mr. Pembroke saw the child, both father and son would be thrown out at once. Arthur heard the soft footsteps of the man, followed by smaller, lighter footsteps, those of a child. "Theo?" Samuel whispered, his voice trembling with anxiety. "Sit down in that corner, on the rug. Don't move, don't touch anything, don't make a single sound. Mr. Pembroke is sleeping in the chair. If you wake him, Daddy will lose his job, and tonight we'll have nowhere to sleep. Do you understand?" "Yes, Daddy," a small, gentle, obedient voice replied. Arthur, in his role as a sleeping old man, suddenly felt a flicker of curiosity slip past his skepticism. That voice wasn't mischievous. It carried the tone of fear. "Daddy has to go polish the silver in the dining room," Samuel whispered urgently. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. Theo, be good." "I promise," the boy said. Arthur heard the door close. Samuel was gone. Now there were only the billionaire and the boy in the room. There is a detail I can't ignore, that father didn't tell his son, "Don't take anything," but "Don't touch anything." In Samuel's mind, his son had never been a threat. His fear wasn't a fear of the child's greed. It was the fear of a poor man facing a world ready to condemn him simply for existing in the wrong place. That was the distinction Arthur, at that moment, wasn't yet awake enough to recognize. A long silence stretched out. In the room there was only the crackle of the fire and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Arthur kept his breathing steady, perfectly mimicking deep sleep. But in truth, he was listening to every smallest sound. He expected the boy to start playing, expected the sound of a vase breaking, or the stealthy scuffle of feet as Theo explored the wealth he had never been allowed to touch. Children were curious, and poor children, Arthur had always believed, longed for what they didn't have. But Theo didn't move. 5 minutes passed. Arthur's neck began to ache from holding his head in one position, but he didn't break character. He kept waiting. Then he heard it. A very faint rustle of fabric. The boy was standing up. Arthur's whole body tensed, as if every sense had just been switched on. "Here it comes," he thought. "The little thief makes his move." He heard small footsteps approaching the chair, slow, hesitant, as though Theo were weighing every step. The boy came closer, and Arthur knew exactly what was drawing his gaze. The envelope. $5,000 lying there, just inches from his relaxed hand. A 7-year-old knew perfectly well what money was. He understood that money could buy toys, candy, food, maybe even a whole week of not having to worry about where to sleep that night. Arthur pictured the scene he had rehearsed hundreds of times in his mind. Theo would reach out, snatch the money, stuff it into his pocket. Then Arthur would open his eyes, catch him red-handed, and fire the father on the spot. One more lesson. Trust no one. The footsteps stopped. Theo was standing right beside him. Arthur could almost feel the child's breath. He waited for the rustle of paper. He waited for the hurried grab. But it never came. Instead, Arthur felt something strange. A small, cold hand, light as a feather, gently touched his arm. What is he doing? He wondered. Checking whether I'm still alive? Theo withdrew his hand. Then Arthur heard a sigh, strangely heavy for such a small child. "Mr. Pembroke,"
Mr. Pembroke?
the boy whispered, so faintly it was nearly swallowed by the sound of the snow outside. Arthur didn't react. He sniffed and let out a fake snore, gruff and hoarse, exactly like a cranky old man. Theo moved, and then Arthur heard a sound that confused him. Not the sound of money being taken, but the sound of a zipper. What is this boy doing? Arthur thought, his mind racing. Then he felt something warmer being placed over his legs. It was the boy's jacket, a thin, cheap windbreaker, still slightly damp from the snow outside. Theo spread it over Arthur's knees like a small blanket. The room was drafty. The large windows still leaked cold despite the burning fireplace. Only now did Arthur realize his hands truly were cold. Theo carefully smoothed the little jacket over the old man's legs. Then the boy whispered, as if speaking to himself, "He's cold. Daddy says sick people shouldn't be left cold." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. This was not in his script. The boy wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at him. Then Arthur heard a faint rustle on the table. He thought. Here it is. Now that he's lulled me into a sense of safety, he'll take the money. But the money didn't move. Instead, Arthur heard the sound of paper sliding gently across wood. The envelope was being pushed, but not to hide it, not to take it. Arthur dared to crack open his left eye, just a sliver, hidden behind his lashes. And what he saw shook him to his core. Theo stood beside the table, a thin, frail child with messy hair, wearing clothes that were clearly hand-me-downs, his shoes torn at the toes. And yet his face was filled with focus, seriousness, and care, enough to make an adult feel ashamed. Theo had noticed the envelope teetering on the edge of the table, as though it might fall to the floor. He simply pushed it toward the center, closer to the lamp, to keep it safe. Then Theo noticed something else. On the floor, near Arthur's feet, lay a small, leather-bound notebook. It must have slipped from the old man's lap when he sat down. Theo bent to pick it up, wiped the dust off the cover with his sleeve, and placed it on the table beside the envelope of cash. "Safe now," Theo whispered. Then the boy returned to the rug in the corner. He sat down, drew his knees to his chest, and wrapped his arms around himself. He trembled faintly. He had just given a stranger his only jacket, and now he was cold. I want to pause for a long time at this moment, because there's something a 7-year-old boy understood that the 76-year-old billionaire had long forgotten. Kindness does not require its recipient to be deserving. Theo didn't weigh whether the man was rich or poor, good or bad, worth helping or not. He simply saw someone who was cold. We adults have learned far too many reasons not to be kind. Children haven't yet. And sometimes that not yet knowing is the wisest thing of all. Arthur lay there, his mind completely blank. For the first time in 20 years, Arthur Pembroke didn't know what to think. He had set a trap to catch a mouse. But what he caught instead was a dove. The wall of suspicion he had built in his heart, hard as stone, began to crack. Just a little. "Why didn't you take it?"
Arthur screamed silently. "I know you two are poor. Your father's shoes have holes in the soles. Why didn't you take the money?" And hey, before the story continues, where are you watching from? Boston? Or somewhere far away I've never even heard of? Leave a comment and let me know how far this story has traveled. And if you love stories where a single, small moment can change an entire life, don't forget to subscribe. Because what Arthur does next, even a man as rich as he was, found shocking. But the question is, when Samuel returns and sees his son's jacket draped over his boss's legs, will he feel grateful? Or will panic take over, driving him to ruin everything with his own hands?
Before Arthur could process the emotion rising within him, an old memory suddenly came flooding back, a memory he had tried to bury for 20 years. It was a winter long ago. Arthur was at the hospital then. His wife, Beatrice, lay on the hospital bed, so thin she was barely a shadow of her former self. Cancer had quietly devoured her body for 18 months. The doctor said she had only a few days left. Arthur sat beside the bed, holding her hand tightly. He had cancelled every meeting, cancelled every business trip. For the first time in his life, he had placed a human being above his work. "You're here," Beatrice whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "I thought you'd be too busy." "Nothing is more important than you," Arthur said, silent tears sliding down his cheeks. Beatrice smiled weakly. Then she asked, very softly, "Where are the children?"
Where are the children?
Arthur stiffened. Their 3 children, Julian, Henry, and Charlotte, were not there. Julian was in Monte Carlo. Henry was skiing in Aspen. Charlotte was in New York, attending a lavish fashion launch. All 3 had told their father they were too busy to come.
Coming soon.
"They'll be here soon," Arthur said. A gentle lie, but a necessary one. Beatrice looked straight into his eyes. She knew. She had always known. "Don't let your heart grow bitter," she whispered. "Promise me, Arthur. Promise me you won't let my death turn you into a hard, bitter man." Arthur nodded. He promised. But he did not keep that promise. Beatrice passed away at 3 in the morning, with only Arthur beside her, holding her hand until her final breath. The 3 children called 3 days later, not to offer condolences, but to ask about the will. From that day on, Arthur began building a wall around his heart. He fired long-time employees merely on the suspicion they might have stolen something. He stopped believing explanations. He began testing people, scrutinizing them, setting traps. And every time, people failed his test. Until today. Until Theo. I believe the hardest promise to keep is the one we truly want to keep. Arthur didn't betray Beatrice because he was a bad man. He betrayed it because the pain was too great, and because bitterness, strange as it sounds, is a safe refuge. When you've come to believe that everyone is awful, then no one can ever disappoint you again. Bitterness is the armor of hearts that once loved too deeply. The trouble is, that armor also keeps the warmth out. Before Arthur could finish working through the emotions surging inside him, the heavy door of the library suddenly opened again. Samuel rushed in. He was gasping, his face pale with terror. Clearly, he had run the entire way from the dining room, not daring to slow down for even a second. Samuel's eyes swept quickly across the room. First, he looked toward the rug in the corner, where Theo sat curled up, trembling, without his jacket. Then his gaze shifted to the armchair, and his heart nearly stopped. His son's old, cheap, grubby jacket was draped over the billionaire's expensive suit. Right beside it, on the mahogany table, the stack of cash still lay there, completely untouched. Samuel's hand flew to his mouth. In his mind, the worst possible scenario instantly took shape. He thought Theo had disturbed the boss, thought his son had touched things he wasn't allowed to touch. Worse, he thought Theo had tried to take the money, then panicked and tried to cover it up. Theo, Samuel hissed, his voice sharp with panic. He lunged forward, grabbed the boy's arm, and pulled him to his feet. "What did you do? Why is your jacket on him? Did you touch him? Did you touch that money?" Theo looked up at his father, his eyes wide, confused, and frightened.
"No, Daddy," he said. "He was shivering. I just wanted to keep him warm, and the paper was about to fall, so I fixed it to make it safe." "Oh, God," Samuel cried out, tears welling up. "He's going to wake up. He's going to fire us. I told you not to move." In his panic, Samuel hurriedly pulled the jacket off Arthur's legs, his hands shaking so badly he nearly knocked over the table lamp. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," he whispered to the man who was sleeping, even though he was certain the man couldn't hear him. "Please, please don't wake up." As he pulled the jacket away, an image suddenly flared up in Samuel's mind, one he could never erase. Lily. 2 years earlier, St. Anne's Hospital, a delivery room flooded with the shrill alarms of machines. Lily lay on the bed, pale, struggling to draw shallow, fragile breaths after a failed emergency cesarean. Samuel clutched his wife's hand. Beside them, in a small bassinet, was Theo, too young to understand what was happening, knowing only enough to cry in fear. "You're going to be okay, right?" Samuel asked, his voice breaking. "The doctor said you'd be fine." But Lily knew. She smiled weakly, her icy fingers tightening around Samuel's hand one last time. "Promise me," she whispered. "Never let our child go hungry or cold the way I once did. He deserves a better life than we had. Promise me." "I promise," Samuel sobbed. "I'll do everything. He'll never suffer the way we did." Lily closed her eyes. The battle with the internal bleeding ended 30 minutes later. And now, standing in this luxurious library, watching Theo shiver without his jacket, Samuel suddenly realized a painful truth. He had failed. He hadn't protected his son as he'd promised. And now, his son's very act of kindness, the kindness Lily had taught them both, was about to destroy everything. There is a cruel irony I can't help but point out. Samuel was terrified because of the very best thing he had ever passed on to his son. He had taught Theo to be kind, exactly as Lily had wished, and then he was horrified to see his son being kind. That is the tragedy of the poor in a harsh world. They are forced to teach their children that kindness is a dangerous luxury. And Arthur, lying there pretending to sleep, understood for the first time that he was the one who had created that world. Arthur felt the jacket being torn from his body, and at the same time, he felt the father's terror. It radiated from Samuel like heat. This was not the fear of a guilty man. This was the fear of a father standing on the brink of losing everything, all because of his child's act of kindness. And in that moment, Arthur understood a chilling truth. He had become the monster everyone feared. Not because he was cruel, but because he had made others believe that their kindness was something dangerous. Arthur knew he couldn't lie still for another second. It was time to wake up. Arthur let out a low groan, a deliberate, dramatic groan, and shifted in his chair. Samuel froze instantly. He pulled Theo tightly against his chest and backed toward the door, his whole body taut like a deer caught in headlights. Arthur opened his eyes. He blinked a few times, as if waking from a deep sleep, then slowly lowered his gaze to the panicked father and the boy standing by the door. Arthur put on the most perfect expression of irritation he could manage. He frowned, his thick gray brows drawing together. "What's all this?" he grumbled. "What's all the noise?
Can a man not rest in his own home?
I'm very sorry, Mr. Pembroke, Samuel stammered, bowing his head. I was only cleaning. This is my son. I had no other choice. The school is closed. We'll leave right away. Please, don't fire me. I'll take the boy outside. I need this job.
Arthur looked at the two of them. His gaze settled on the envelope of money, still sitting exactly where Theo had pushed it. Then he looked at the boy. Theo was trembling, not from cold now, but from fear. Arthur sat up straight. He reached out, picked up the envelope, and tapped it lightly against his palm. Out of habit, Samuel squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the accusation. "Boy!" Theo peeked out from behind his father's leg.
Yes, sir?
"Come here." Samuel tightened his grip on the boy's shoulders.
Sir, he didn't mean...
"Come here." Theo gently pulled his father's hands away. He walked slowly toward the armchair, each small step trembling, then stopped right in front of Arthur's knees. Arthur leaned forward, his face just inches from the boy's. He stared straight into Theo's eyes, searching for a lie, searching for the greed he was certain existed in every human being. "You put your jacket on me, didn't you?" Theo swallowed.
Yes, sir.
"Why?" "I'm a stranger. I'm rich. I have a whole closet full of fur coats upstairs. Why would you give me your jacket?" Theo looked down at his torn shoes, then back up at Arthur.
Because you looked cold, sir, he answered. My dad says that when someone is cold, you give them a blanket, even if they're rich. Cold is still cold.
Arthur went still. Cold is still cold. A truth so simple it was brutal. I think it was at these very words that the wall inside Arthur came down. Not because they were grand, but because they were so true. His whole life, Arthur had divided the world into the rich and the poor, the trustworthy, and those to be guarded against. And a 7-year-old boy had just erased all those lines with 5 words. Cold is still cold. Hunger is still hunger. Loneliness is still loneliness, whether you sleep on straw or on silk. Perhaps true wisdom is not about knowing more, but about remembering the things we already knew as children. Arthur turned to Samuel. The man was holding his breath, as if one wrong inhale would cause everything to collapse. "What's your name?" Arthur asked, his voice softening a little.
Theo, sir.
Arthur nodded slowly. He looked down at the envelope of money in his hand, then glanced toward the open door of the library. A thought, a plan, quietly took shape. The test wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The boy had passed the first level, the level of honesty. But Arthur wanted to know more. He wanted to know whether this was merely a chance moment or whether the boy truly possessed a heart of gold. Arthur slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket. "You woke me," he grumbled, returning to his irritated act. "I hate being woken up." Samuel let out a choked sob. "We'll leave, sir." "Stop." Arthur's voice lashed across the room like a whip. Samuel halted, not daring to take another step. He turned back, his face drained of all color. "I haven't said you're allowed to leave," Arthur growled. He lifted a trembling finger and pointed at the armchair. "Look there." Samuel followed his gaze. On the burgundy velvet was a dark, damp stain where Theo's wet jacket had rested. "My chair," Arthur said, his voice dripping with feigned anger. "Imported Italian velvet, $200 a yard. And now it's wet. Ruined."
I'll dry it right away, sir. I'll get a cloth.
"Water stains velvet," Arthur lied. He stood up, leaning heavily on his cane, and stepped closer to the terrified father. "It can't just be dried. It needs professional restoration. That'll cost $500. Arthur watched them carefully, This was the second part of the test. He wanted to see whether the father would take his anger out on the child, wanted to see whether the pressure would make Samuel shout, blame Theo for a sum of money he could never afford. He wanted to know whether the bond between father and son would break. Samuel looked at the stain, then at Arthur. Tears streamed silently down his exhausted face. "Mr. Pembroke," he pleaded, "please, I don't have $500. I haven't even been paid this month yet. Please, deduct it from my wages. I'll work for free. Please don't hurt my son." Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. The man was willing to work for free. Rare. But Arthur still wasn't satisfied. He looked down at Theo. "And you caused this damage. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Theo stepped forward. He didn't cry. His small face was strangely serious. He reached into his pocket. "I don't have $500, Theo said softly, "but I have this." He opened his small hand. Resting in his palm was a tiny, worn toy car, a little yellow bus, missing one wheel, its paint chipped, old and worthless to anyone else. But the way Theo held it, it was as though he were holding a diamond. "This is Lily's little bus," Theo explained. "It's the fastest bus in the world. It used to belong to my mom before she went to heaven. Daddy gave it to me." Samuel gasped. "Theo, no, you don't have to." "It's okay, Daddy," Theo said. He looked up at Arthur. "You can take Lily's little bus to pay for the chair. It's my best friend. But you're angry, and I don't want you to be angry with my dad." Theo reached out and placed the broken toy bus on the expensive mahogany table, right beside the leather-bound notebook. Arthur went completely still. He stared at the tiny toy, his breath catching in his throat. The room suddenly felt too small to breathe in. He thought of the stack of cash in his pocket. Thousands of dollars. Then he looked again at the three-wheeled bus on the table. This boy was offering the most precious thing he owned to fix a mistake born of kindness. He was giving up the only remaining keepsake of his mother just to save his father's job. Arthur's heart, frozen for so many years, split open with a sharp, searing pain. And suddenly, he understood a truth that left him shaken. This boy who had nothing was richer than Arthur would ever be in his whole life. Arthur had millions of dollars, but he had never, and perhaps never would, sacrifice the thing he loved most for anyone. I consider this the most valuable moment in the entire story. Because Theo wasn't giving away something he had to spare, he was giving away something irreplaceable. There is a vast difference between giving from your surplus and giving from your scarcity. The rich still donate, but they rarely feel pain. Theo felt pain. And it is precisely that pain that is the true measure of generosity. Arthur, who had never had to feel pain in giving anything away, was seeing true generosity for the first time. And it came from a child in shoes with holes in them. The silence stretched on. Outside, the snow kept falling softly past the windows. Arthur slowly picked up the toy. His hand trembled. You. His voice no longer grumbled. It was barely a whisper. You would give me this just because a chair got wet. Yes, sir, enough? Theo answered. Is it enough? Arthur closed his eyes. In his mind appeared the image of his own children, calling only when they wanted a new sports car or a vacation home. They had never given him anything. They only knew how to take. Yes, Arthur whispered, opening his eyes.
More than enough.
They were wet. Yes, Theo, it's enough. More than enough. Arthur sank back into his chair. The performance was over. He could no longer play the villain. "Sit down," Arthur said, and his voice was now completely different. No sharpness, no heavy authority. It was the voice of a tired, lonely old man.
Sir.
"Sir?"
I said sit down.
"I said sit down," Arthur
Please.
growled out of habit,
Just sit
then
down.
immediately softened his tone. "Please, just sit. Don't look at me as if I'm about to eat you."
I am about to eat you.
Samuel hesitated for a few seconds, then sat on the edge of the sofa, instinctively pulling Theo into his lap. Arthur looked down at the toy in his hand, his thumb gently spinning the remaining wheels, his eyes distant. "I have a confession to make," he said, still looking at the floor.
It is only wet.
"The chair isn't damaged at all. It's just wet. In an hour, it'll be dry." Samuel exhaled a breath he had been holding far too long. "And," Arthur continued, raising his head to look directly at the father and son, "I wasn't asleep." Samuel's eyes widened. You weren't asleep?" "No," Arthur shook his head. "I was pretending. I deliberately left that money on the table. I wanted to see if you would take it. I wanted to catch you." Samuel instinctively held Theo tighter. Hurt was written plainly across his face. "You tested us, like mice in a maze." "Yes," Arthur admitted, without evasion. "I'm a bitter old man, Samuel. I believe everyone is a thief. I believe everyone has a price." He lifted a trembling finger toward Theo. "But this boy," his voice broke. "He didn't take the money. He covered me with his jacket simply because he thought I was cold. And then he offered me his mother's keepsake." Arthur raised a hand to wipe away a tear rolling down his cheek. He made no effort to hide it. "I lost my way," he whispered. "I have all the money in the world, and yet I'm poor. And you have nothing, and yet you've raised a king." I want to pause at a small detail in this moment. When Arthur confessed, it's easy to focus only on Samuel's reaction, the hurt, the bewilderment of an adult who has just learned he was being tested. But I think the child's reaction is the one that matters. Because Theo couldn't grasp the concept of a test. In his world, no one pretends to be cold in order to trap someone else. Theo looked up at Arthur, his small brows knitting in confusion. "So, you were pretending to be cold, sir?" Arthur opened his mouth to answer, but Theo went on, his voice innocent. "But your hands really were cold. I felt them." Arthur went still. It was true. His hands really had been cold. He had set a fake trap, but the cold was real, the loneliness was real, and the boy's kindness was real too. The child had touched a truth Arthur hadn't anticipated. He wasn't acting out a man who needed warming. He was the man who needed warming. Perhaps that is the most frightening thing for men like Arthur. They put on so many performances so that no one will see the truth. But sometimes a child, with his clumsy honesty, sees right through all of them. Theo wasn't fooled by the act because he didn't care about the act. He only cared about the cold hand. And that, it turned out, was the only thing that mattered. Arthur stood up. He walked toward the fireplace, took a deep breath as if gathering the last of his courage, then turned back to the father and son. "The test is over," Arthur declared, "and you've passed, both of you." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the thick envelope of money, stepped in front of Samuel, and held it out. "Take it." Samuel shook his head firmly. "No, sir, I don't want your money. I just want to work. I want to earn a living honestly." "Take it," Arthur insisted. "This isn't charity, it's a reward, payment for the lesson your son just taught me." He softened his voice. "Please, buy the boy a warm coat, a new pair of shoes, and buy yourself a bed that doesn't make your back ache every morning. Take it." Samuel's hand trembled as he reached out and accepted the envelope. Thank you, Mr. Pembroke. Truly, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Arthur replied, and a small, genuine smile, the first in many years, touched his lips. I have a business proposal for Theo. Theo looked up, his eyes lighting up. For me? Yes, Arthur said. He lifted the small bus. I'll keep Lily's little bus. It's mine now. You gave it to me to settle the debt. Theo's face flickered with sadness. But, Arthur went on, I can't drive a vehicle with only 3 wheels. I need a mechanic, someone to help me fix things around here, and someone to help me fix myself. Arthur knelt down, a movement that sent a sharp pain through his aging knees, so he could be at eye level with the 7-year-old boy. Theo, he said softly, would you like to come here every day after school? You can sit in this library, do your homework, and teach this grumpy old man how to be kind again. In return, I'll take care of your education, all the way through college. Deal? Theo turned to look at his father. Samuel was openly crying now, one hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. He nodded. Theo turned back to Arthur. He smiled, a gap-toothed smile, pure and heartbreakingly beautiful. Yes, Theo said, then held out his small hand. Arthur Pembroke, the billionaire who had never trusted anyone, reached out, took that hand, and shook it. People tend to think beautiful stories end at their most beautiful moment. But real life isn't like that. Real life is what happens after the handshake. And that part isn't always as easy as we imagine. 3 years passed since that snowy afternoon. Arthur Pembroke's mahogany-paneled library had changed almost beyond recognition. The place that once made people hold their breath as they entered was now flooded with light. The curtains were always drawn wide, letting the morning sun pour into every corner. The walls, once cold and bare, were now covered with colorful drawings. Theo's school artwork, family portraits, houses with smoking chimneys and bright blue skies. On the large desk, amid files and legal documents, there was always one small but striking object. The yellow bus, Lily's little bus. Arthur had hired the finest jeweler in Boston to restore the missing wheel. The new wheel wasn't merely replaced, it was crafted from pure gold. Theo, now 10, sat cross-legged on the rug, absorbed in a math problem. Arthur sat in his familiar armchair, this time not pretending to sleep, leaning toward the boy, patiently following every number. Mr. Pembroke, Theo frowned, tapping his pencil on the notebook. I don't understand this part about decimals.
Call me Arthur, kid.
Call me Arthur, my boy. He smiled, repeating what he'd said countless times. Let me take a look. Samuel entered with a tray of tea. He no longer wore the worn janitor's uniform. Instead, a simple but well-fitted suit. Arthur had promoted him to estate manager, in charge of the entire maintenance and gardening staff. Thank you, Samuel, Arthur said, accepting the cup of tea. There was no longer any distance between master and servant, only trust and friendship. But not every day was as peaceful as that afternoon had been. I want to tell you something people don't often like to mention when they speak of kind children. Because a kind child doesn't mean a perfect human being. Theo grew up. And growing up means running into the things that bend you out of shape. When Theo was 13, something happened that Arthur never told anyone. That day, a group of classmates came over to Theo's house, the cozy little home Arthur had bought for father and son nearby. One of the boys spotted the old toy bus. Theo still kept an identical one, a replica Arthur had made for him, and sneered. A baby's toy! Are you so poor you play with a broken car? That night, Theo hid the bus at the bottom of his closet. And for the first time, he felt ashamed. Ashamed of his background, of his gardener father, of the shoes he had once worn. For weeks, Theo became irritable, distant. He began speaking to Arthur in the tone of a boy who wanted to get rich fast and forget who he had once been. One evening in the library, Theo blurted out, "When I grow up, I'm going to sell off all these old things. I want everything to be new." Arthur didn't shout. He simply took Lily's little bus down from the shelf and placed it in Theo's hand. "Do you know why I keep it? Not because it's beautiful, but because one day, a child who had nothing taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by what he owns. If you sell this, you won't be selling a toy. You'll be selling the very boy who saved me." Theo was silent for a long time. Then he cried. That night, he took the bus out from the bottom of the closet and set it back on his desk. I think about this moment often because it teaches a simple truth. Kindness is not a gift we receive once and keep forever. It is something that must be chosen again and again, every day, especially in the moments when it becomes inconvenient. Theo nearly lost himself, not because he was bad, but because he was human. And what kept him being Theo was an old man willing to remind him who he was. That was Arthur's true role, not the giver of wealth, but the keeper of memory. Time continued to pass. Once, Samuel asked Arthur about Julian. Arthur sighed. Julian, his eldest, had just been arrested for stock fraud. Arthur had tried to help, with the best lawyers money could buy, but Julian wanted only one thing, a blank check. "He chose his own path," Arthur said, his voice lowering. "I tried to teach him, but I taught him too late." Theo looked up from his notebook. "You're not a bad father, Mr. Arthur," he said naturally. "Sometimes grown-ups just forget how to listen." Arthur chuckled softly, his heart warming in a way money never had. "You're a very wise boy, Theo Carter." By the summer he received a letter announcing his acceptance to a prestigious private school on a full scholarship. Arthur, walking more slowly, clapped his hands, unable to hide his pride. "Wonderful! I knew it! I wrote your recommendation letter myself." Arthur had bought father and son a cozy little home near the estate. Still, Samuel brought Theo over every day and stayed to work. The three of them ate dinner together, watched movies together, told each other small stories and silly jokes. For the first time in 15 years, laughter filled Pembroke House. Arthur's 3 biological children never came back, but Samuel and Theo were there every day. They had given him something that the oil paintings and the rare books never could: a family. One winter morning, when Theo was 14, Mrs. Marsh, the housekeeper, was about to have the old burgundy velvet chair cleaned. Arthur stopped her. "Leave that mark," he said. Mrs. Marsh looked puzzled. On the velvet, there was still a faint, damp stain that had faded over the years, the trace of a boy's wet jacket long ago. "Sir, that stain—" "That's not a stain," Arthur cut in, his voice strangely gentle. "That's where a child covered me with his jacket. I lied to him that the mark had ruined a $500 chair. The truth is, it saved something far more valuable. Leave it there. It's the most precious thing in this room." I love this detail because it speaks volumes about Arthur 10 years later. A small lie, at first only a trick to test the father's heart, had now been kept by him as a kind of monument. Because people who truly change tend to do one thing: they turn old scars into landmarks. Arthur didn't wipe the damp mark away, just as he didn't erase his bitter past. He kept it, not to torment himself, but to remember that it was from that very spot that he had been saved. There are some stains we ought to keep.
They remind us that we were once forgiven. Then came the autumn Theo was 16. A mild heart attack put Arthur in St. Anne's Hospital for observation. Theo sat by the bed, holding his hand. "I'm scared, Mr. Arthur," Theo whispered. "Don't be afraid," Arthur replied. "I'm not going anywhere yet. I still have to wait until you graduate from college." Samuel sat on the other side of the bed, also holding Arthur's hand. "You changed our lives," he said, his voice catching. Arthur shook his head gently. "No, you're the ones who changed mine. Before I met you, I was just a bitter old man waiting to die. Now, I'm a happy old man who wants to live." That week, Arthur called his lawyer. He began rewriting his will. And then, exactly 10 years since the day Theo had laid the jacket over his legs, one spring, a 17-year-old Theo stood before the gates of a university where he had just been accepted on a full scholarship. The tailored suit he wore was a birthday gift from Arthur. Arthur, now leaning on his cane beside him, had eyes shining with undisguised pride. "You did it, my boy." "Not just me," Theo shook his head. "We did it. You were the one who believed in me when no one else did." Arthur pulled him into an embrace. "I love you like my own son, Theo. You know that, don't you?" "I love you too, Mr. Arthur." Samuel stood nearby, raising his camera. He was no longer a janitor. He was now the executive director of the Pembroke Foundation, the charity Arthur had established to help single-parent families like theirs had once been. "You two, hold still. Let me take a picture." Samuel said it, smiling through tears. Arthur and Theo stood side by side, hands on each other's shoulders. They were not grandfather and grandson by blood, but they were family to each other by choice. And that is the strongest kind of family of all.
Another 3 years passed. That spring, Pembroke House was crowded once again. But there was no music, no wine, no polite laughter of lavish parties. The atmosphere in the house was heavy and solemn. This was not a celebration, but a final gathering. Arthur Pembroke had passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days earlier. He died in that very burgundy velvet armchair, the chair where, 10 years before, a small test had changed his entire life. I want to pause at the moment of Arthur's passing. On his last night, as Mrs. Marsh later recounted, Theo, by then away at school, had called home. Arthur sat in that chair, Lily's little bus with its golden wheel resting in the palm of his hand. He said a single sentence to Theo over the phone, then hung up and drifted off to sleep. That sentence was, "Thank you for seeing that I was cold." The next morning, they found him still sitting there, the bus in his hand, his face at peace. No long explanation, just an old man, a chair, and a toy that had once saved his life. I think there are some endings that need no loud tears. Peace, sometimes, is the thing that makes us cry the most. In the spacious library, lawyers, business executives, and influential figures from the financial world filled the rows of chairs. Near the window, a young man stood silently, looking out at the snow-covered garden. Theo, now 20, tall and composed, with a bright face and a sharply tailored suit. He gazed out at the garden, where Samuel, now 41, was quietly rearranging the flower pots, as if trying to keep everything tidy, everything beautiful, one last time. Arthur's 3 biological children were also present, Julian, Henry, and Charlotte.
They sat on the opposite side of the room, clearly separated from everyone else. Their eyes kept darting to their watches. They whispered to one another about selling the mansion, about the companies, about how the assets would be divided. They didn't look grieving. They looked impatient. Attorney Henderson cleared his throat and began reading the will of Arthur Harrison Pembroke. "To my children," he read slowly, "I leave you the trust funds that were established for you at your births. You never visited me without mentioning money, so I assume money is all you ever wanted. You already have your millions. Enjoy them." The three children muttered in irritation, but quickly looked satisfied. They stood up, preparing to leave the room, as if the rest of the will were no longer worth hearing. "Please wait," Attorney Henderson said. "There's more." They stopped, turned back, annoyed. "For the remainder of my estate," the attorney continued, "including my companies, this mansion, all investments and personal assets, I leave everything to the only person who gave me something when I had nothing." All three children froze. They whirled around, confused. "Who?" Julian blurted out. "We are his family." The attorney took a breath and read each word clearly. "I leave everything to Theo Carter." The room erupted. Shouts of outrage filled the air. The two sons pointed at Theo. "Him? The gardener's son? This is a joke. He manipulated our father." Theo didn't move. He said nothing. He simply stood still, holding a small object in his hand, his thumb unconsciously rubbing its familiar surface. The attorney raised his hand for order. "Mr. Pembroke left a letter explaining this decision. He instructed me to read it aloud." He unfolded the handwritten letter, his voice slow and steady as the room gradually quieted. "To my children, and to the world. You measure wealth in gold and property. You believe I left everything to Theo because I had lost my mind.
You are mistaken. I am repaying a debt. 10 years ago, on a snow-soaked Saturday afternoon, I was a beggar in spirit. I was cold, lonely, and empty. A 7-year-old boy saw me shivering. He did not see a billionaire. He saw only a human being. He covered me with his only jacket. He protected my money when he could easily have taken it. But the greatest debt was repaid when he offered me the most precious thing he owned, a broken toy bus, to save his father from my anger. He gave me everything he had, expecting nothing in return. That day, he taught me that the poorest pocket can still hold the richest heart. He saved me from dying as a bitter and hateful man. He gave me a family. He gave me 10 years of laughter, noise, and love. So I leave him my estate. It is a small exchange because he gave me back my own soul. The attorney folded the letter. He looked at Theo. "Theo," he said softly, "Mr. Pembroke wished for you to receive this." Before he could present the velvet box, Charlotte, the only daughter, jumped to her feet, her face flushed red. "We are his biological children. We carry the Pembroke blood, and he is just the son of a gardener." Theo slowly turned toward her. His eyes held no anger, only a strange, steady calm. "But I carry his heart," Theo said quietly. "And for 10 years, I was there for him. Where were you?" Charlotte fell silent. I thought for a long time about these three children, because they aren't simply one-dimensional villains. They were greedy, yes, but they were also a product of Arthur himself, of a father who chose work over his children, and only at the end of his life learned how to love from a stranger's child. There's a hidden tragedy here. Arthur gave Theo everything he had never given his own children.
and so the anger of Julian, Henry, and Charlotte was not entirely unreasonable. They weren't just losing an inheritance. They were seeing proof that their father was capable of love, just not with them. That is the part that hurts most. And perhaps that's why there is a small moment worth noticing as Charlotte walked toward the door. As she passed the velvet box the attorney had just opened, Charlotte's eyes accidentally fell on the toy bus with its golden wheel. She stopped for half a second. Something flickered across her face, perhaps a memory of some childhood toy, of an afternoon her father should have been there but wasn't. Her hand twitched slightly, as if to reach out. Then she pulled back, gripped her purse tightly, and walked out the door, her heels clicking coldly on the wooden floor. She didn't look back. But in that half second, she had been a human being, not a villain. And sometimes, half a second is all that's left of a hardened heart. Henry, the second son, said coldly, "We'll sue. We'll overturn this will." Attorney Henderson shook his head. "You may try, but this will was drafted by 5 top attorneys, witnessed by 3 independent parties, and Mr. Pembroke recorded video confirmation of his sound mind. This will cannot be contested." The 3 children looked at one another, then left in silent fury. The attorney presented a small velvet box to Theo. Theo opened it. Inside, resting on pristine white silk, was the old toy bus, Lily's little bus, with its wheel of pure gold. Arthur had kept it for 10 years. Theo picked up the bus. Tears streamed silently down his face. He wasn't thinking about the mansion, not about the millions of dollars. He was thinking only of his friend, the gruff old man who had patiently sat beside him, helping him solve difficult math problems. Theo walked over to Samuel, who had just come in from the garden. Samuel wrapped his arms tightly around his son. "He was a good man, Theo," Samuel whispered. "He just needed a jacket."
Theo nodded, clutching the bus tightly
Yes.
in his hand.
He only needed a
"Yes,"
coat.
he said softly. "He just needed a jacket." As the city of Boston entered a new year, Theo Carter was 25 years old. He was no longer the skinny boy in torn shoes of years past. Theo had graduated with a degree in business administration, a path many believed would lead straight to yachts, supercars, and lavish parties. But Theo chose a completely different direction. He did not use his inherited wealth to show off. Instead, Theo transformed Pembroke House into a community center. The mansion that had once been a symbol of isolation and suspicion became a free school for the children of single-parent families. The mahogany library, where the test had taken place years before, was no longer a heavy space of power. It became a children's library, flooded with light, books, and the eager whispers of young dreams. At the center of the room, inside a carefully preserved glass case, stood Lily's little bus, the bus with its golden wheels. Beside it, a brass plaque bore a simple yet profound inscription. In memory of Arthur Harrison Pembroke, a man who learned that true wealth is not measured by what we own, but by what we give. One quiet afternoon, Theo walked into the library. In a corner of the room, a boy of about 7 sat staring intently at the bus in the glass case, his curious eyes never leaving it. "Do you like it?" Theo asked, sitting down beside the boy. The boy nodded. "It's beautiful. The wheels are made of gold, right?" "That's right," Theo smiled. "But did you know, when this bus was given to the man who once lived here, it only had 3 wheels? It was old and broken."
Then why did he accept
The boy frowned, confused. "Then why did he accept it?" Theo was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly. "Because sometimes the most valuable gift isn't the most perfect one. It's the one with meaning. That bus was given out of love, not money, and that's what makes it priceless." The boy looked up at Theo. "Who was the one who gave it to him?" Theo smiled, his eyes glowing with memory. "That's a long story, but in short, It's the story of an old man who forgot how to love and a boy who helped him remember. The boy thought for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you think someday I could do something like that? Help someone remember how to love?" Theo placed a hand on the boy's shoulder.
I know you can.
I know you can. How? By being kind, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching, and especially when no one is watching. The boy nodded solemnly. "I'll try." "That's enough," Theo said gently. As the boy ran off to play with the other children, Samuel walked into the library. He was now 46, his hair streaked with grey, but his face was peaceful and fulfilled. "Thinking about him?" Samuel asked, sitting down beside his son. "Every day," Theo admitted. "Do you think he'd be proud?" Samuel looked around the room, children reading, studying, laughing. Walls that were once cold, now filled with life. "My son," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "He wouldn't just be proud, he'd be amazed. You took his gift and multiplied it 100-fold. Theo looked toward the bus in the glass case. "I only did what he taught me," he said, "to give without expecting anything in return." I won't end with a moral sermon, even though this story holds countless lessons. I only want to leave you with an image. A 7-year-old boy sitting in a sunlit library, looking up at a toy bus with golden wheels in a glass case. He doesn't know the whole story. He doesn't yet understand the will, the millions of dollars, a father who came too late for his own children. He only sees something beautiful, and he wonders whether someday he could do the same. And that, to me, is the real ending. Not the will, not the mansion, but the moment kindness finds someone to carry it on. Outside, the gentle New England spring sun streamed through the tall windows. The rose garden was beginning to bloom. Children's laughter echoed throughout the house. Pembroke House was no longer a fortress of suspicion and fear. It had become a beacon of hope. It all began with a boy, a jacket, and a lesson so simple it was unexpected. Cold is still cold, no matter who you are. In a world where everyone is trying to take something, those who are willing to give are the ones who truly change the world. Arthur Pembroke had all the money in the world, but he was poor, until a child taught him how to love. Never underestimate the power of a small act of kindness. A jacket, a gentle word, a quiet sacrifice. They can melt even the coldest hearts. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so that stories of kindness like this one can reach even farther. Thank you for watching, and see you again in the next stories.